pipeline Toolkit support and Shotgun technical support for obviously Shotgun. So I'm going to run through very quickly why we would use Toolkit. So you may have seen this previously in a presentation. I apologize if I'm going over stuff you've already seen before. I'll keep this very brief, but I just thought I'd cover why you want to use Toolkit before we delve into the more details of what it does and how we set it up. So Toolkit is basically our bridge between Shotgun and our applications, and so sort of the producers and the artists really. The producers are in Shotgun setting up the tasks, assigning people, making sure the timings are correct, and your artists are in your DCC like Maya, and they're doing the work that needs to be done. So let me just bring up my notes a second, excuse me. Excellent. So because we have this sort of bridge between Shotgun and the applications, we're able to present the artists with the files they need to work on. So we have a range of apps that run within these applications, and it basically just means that if you're being assigned a task by the producer or whoever is managing you, you're able to quickly get to the content that you need to work on. Okay. On top of that, you're also able to find all of the information you need within the DCCs. So if you're working on a task, you'll be able to see the notes, other tasks, other publishes, and things that are going on, the conversations that are happening to do with the work that you're working on. And so you're not being forced to go into Shotgun. You can stay within your package and get all of the information you need. On top of that, Toolkit. A major part of Toolkit is actually the organization of the file structure and where files go. So the artists don't need to worry about where they're saving things, and potentially they don't even need to worry about how they're naming things as well. That's all taken care of for them, and that results in a much sort of cleaner structure, project folder structure. So hopefully things aren't going missing, aren't being stored in random places. You're able to be confident that at the end of the project, you've got a nice clean project and you can archive it and bring it back if you need to, and you'll know where everything is. So yeah, I mean, that's a very quick introduction to why we would want to use Toolkit. The main purpose of this today is to just talk you through setting up desktop, setting up your Toolkit project, and we're going to go through that step by step. So in Shotgun, now you may have projects already set up on your Shotgun sites, and you won't have used Toolkit on them. You can use Toolkit on project. You don't have to set up a new project to use Toolkit. You can use Toolkit on an existing projects. For the example today, what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new project. So I guess depending on your site age, you may not all see this same screen as me, but basically the steps are the same. I'm not really doing anything Toolkit specific here. I'm just going to create a new project so we have something fresh to set up. So I'm not going to spend too long on this. Let's just call it my TV series. Okay, so I'm going ahead and creating this project. I'm not really going to spend any time in Shotgun setting this up. Just going to leave it as a default. I'm not going to focus on this side of things, but I've got a project here. Let's say I now want to start setting this up with Toolkit. So desktop. So desktop is basically our portal, our bit of glue that glues the Shotgun website to our integrations and our Toolkit configurations. So the first thing we need to do is we need to go and download desktop. We support Mac, Windows, and Linux, and you just need to make sure you get the right installer. So every user will download desktop and have it installed on their machine, and it becomes their portal for accessing Toolkit. So I would go ahead and download desktop. I'm not going to go through all of this right now, but you would basically just download it from here. I'm going to cancel it. It's a normal installer. You just run it, run through the wizard steps, and it will install it for you. So I have now installed Shotgun Desktop. There's a few other things that you maybe need to be aware of, and it does cover it in this documentation here, and we can send a link around. Typically, if you're running a fairly standard setup, you have internet access, you've not really done anything, you're not running through a proxy or anything, then desktop's just going to work straight out of the box. If you've not got internet connection or you're running an environment where you're going through a proxy, there are a few additional steps you will need to make to get that working. There's a config INI, and you will need to go in there and add in your proxy details to allow Shotgun Desktop to function. I'm not going to go over that in specific detail because it may not apply to you. But if you are working offline, I suggest contacting, putting a ticket for us, and we will talk you through how to specifically set it up offline. It is completely doable. Okay, so I've launched Shotgun Desktop. May not look like it. It's actually minimized to the top here. So in Windows, it will be down in your system tray, and on my Mac, it's gone up here. So the first thing I need to do is sign in. Now, one thing to note here is that because we're setting up a project today, the person setting up the project needs to be an admin. Any users can choose Shotgun Desktop and they can access your projects and your integrations, no problem. But the person initializing and setting up the project in the first place must be a Shotgun admin, or at least have the privileges to be able to create pipeline configurations. So first thing's fairly straightforward. We just put in the URL, you put in your Shotgun username, and you put in your password. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. So the first time this happens, this may take a little while. It will probably need to install some certificates. So you may see a few little things popping up here and there, which you need to fill in. But essentially, you will get back to this state here. So once again, it's gone and minimized itself up to the top here. I can drag that out, put it in a window. And in fact, I've already jumped into a project. This is the screen that you will typically see when you start up your Shotgun Desktop for the first time. So you will see a list of all of your projects that you have available on your Shotgun site, whether they've been set up for Toolkit or not. So we should hopefully see my new project. I haven't put a nice icon on it, but my TV series. So this is the project I've just created that I want to go ahead and set up. So I am going to proceed and do that. Is there anything I am missing? No. Okay, cool. So the first time you set up Toolkit, none of your projects will be, of course, set up. So you will click on one of these projects that you want to set up, and you'll be presented with Set Up Toolkit Project. And we will press that button, and we'll go into the wizard. So the first time you set up a project, you're probably going to want to use the Shotgun default for this. The configuration is something that you will probably dive into, and we will look at in a minute, and we will start making changes to it. So when you come around to set up your second project, for example, we may wish to use a different project as a base for our new project. So when we set up a second project, we want to say, I want to use the configuration from the first project I set up. Or you can point at a Git repository, or you can browse to a location on disk. But the very first time you're going to do this, you're going to probably want to use the Shotgun default. So it's giving you a selection of default templates that you can work with. Actually, these three are sort of being depreciated in the future. What the aim is that everyone starts off with the default, and we provide tutorials on how to configure them to become these templates. So you're probably going to want to start with the default template here as well. Hopefully this is all making sense. So the first question is going to really ask it, well, actually the third question, but the third question it's going to ask us is where do we want to save our project? And in fact, actually, this has reminded me something that I probably should have covered before we go any further, is that it's already aware of where my projects should go. So it's asking me, what's the name of my project I want to call it? I could give it a random name, and that's what it will be called on disk. I don't want that. But how does it know that this project folder here, how does it know to put my projects in here? So what I should point out is before I set up my project, what I really should have done is gone to my site preferences. So I'm going to, again, you need to be an admin probably to do this. You need to go to your site preferences, and we need to go to file management, and we need to add a storage location. Now, if you've not done this before on your site, what you'll see is you won't see any of these boxes here. You'll just see add file storage location. So what you will want to do is you'll want to click add file storage location. You'll want to enter in primary, and you'll want to fill in the locations where your project should be for each OS. Now, typically what happens here is that you would have your projects stored on a server location that, and if you're using Mac, Windows, for example, then both users using Mac and Windows would have access to that same server location. So the paths we would put in here would be basically, I don't know, maybe on Windows it would be mounted to the Z drive, and we would have something like Shotgun projects. And on Mac it might be something like, now essentially they would be pointing to the same server and the same location on that server, but we're accounting for the paths being different on the different operating systems. Now you might ask, why did I call the storage route primary? It's actually, I've already got one here, so I'm going to delete this one. But actually, it is important that you have at least a primary. It has to be called primary. You can have other ones, that's fine, but you must have at least one primary storage location. For most of you that aren't going to use multiple routes, that's all you'll ever need. You won't need to create additional ones. And I will go over creating multiple routes later. But for now, all you will need is a primary location, and you will need to choose a location on your server, ideally, where your users will be able to store their projects. So you will all be referencing the same location. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete that one because I already have a primary one. And we can see that this path here is what Shotgun Desktop is suggesting, is saying my project will go into here. So that's corresponds exactly to that path there. So actually the name it's suggesting already is fine. I'm going to go ahead and call my project my TV series. So with Shotgun Toolkit, there are basically 2 locations per project that you need to be concerned with. You've got the location where your project data is going to go. In fact, actually I should have made that a bit clearer. What's going in this folder is your actual data, so your assets, your images, whatever data that your artists are producing, that's going to go into this folder here. The second path it needs is the path where the configuration goes. Now this is the path where your whoever your TD or whoever's setting up Toolkit will need to have access to. Your artists don't need to have access to this. They don't need to see this, well, I say they don't need to have access. They need to be able to have read access to it, but they don't need to ever go and look at this location. So it needs to be on our server somewhere. I don't have a server, so everything is going to go locally. So some people put their configuration within their project folder. I think this is not a great idea. Projects may wish to move and you don't necessarily want to move your configuration. So I would advise putting your configurations in a separate place to your projects. So I have a projects folder here and I have a configs folder here. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the configs folder. I call it my TV series. So what's going to happen here is that all of the Shotgun configuration, all of the templates, all of the apps, they're going to be installed to this location. The other location we set up, that's where your data, your work is going to go to. So now I've filled in that path, I'm ready to go ahead and run the setup. Now, what will be required is, even if you haven't got internet connection at your studio, you will need initially internet connection. So there's no getting around it. You need an internet connection, at least for your first project setup. Once you've gone through that, we can set it up so that you don't need it going forward, but you will need an internet connection to start with, because what it's doing is it's going to now go through and it's downloading all of the apps and engines that are needed. This might take a little while, hopefully not too long. It should start flying through this, what we're going to cover next. So once this has happened, what we will need to do is we will basically have a project that's set up and ready to go. The users will be able to get in, stuck in, start saving their work. There is one small thing that we need to now, so this is completed. There is now one small change we need to do before we can really get cracking with this. So project setup's complete, it's great. Check out the documentation and we should now see a bunch of applications appear so we can start launching from that. I will do that right now, but I won't do that right now because it's not actually going to work because it doesn't know where these applications are stored right now. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to actually tell Shotgun Toolkit where is Nuke, where is Photoshop, where is Maya. So let's go and have a look at what that project configuration, that project setup has actually gone and done for us. So I'm just going to jump to my Toolkit folder. Okay, and we were in this folder here. So I've already set up a bunch of stuff here, so it's a little bit messy, but basically I had a projects folder and a configs folder. Oh, except I didn't put my TV series in the projects folder this time around. That's okay, not a problem. So the project setup has created this folder. This is my TV series folder, and this is where the data will go. It's completely empty right now. That's perfectly fine. That's normal. We will populate that shortly, but that's where all your images and all your 3D files and what have you will be going. And I created our config in our configs folder. So let's go find that. Here we are, my TV series. Okay. So this config here, it's self-contained for the project at the moment. Modifying this will not affect any of my other projects that are set up. Everything is self-contained. So if I break something in here, it's only going to break it for this project. There are ways of linking it up, and there are various reasons why you want to do that with other projects, but I'm not going to go into that right now. So there's a few things going on here. We have a tank command line. You will find this very useful. Some of the operations in Toolkit can be run through the tank command. I'm not going to go into specifics right now, but you can actually launch all of your apps through the tank command. You can run stuff like creating folders and registering folders and installing apps and engines and changing stuff, and even updating your config, which is quite important. But I won't go into that right now. What we need to do before we can start using our apps and engines is update those application paths. So everything is stored, everything you want to customize is stored in this config folder. You don't need to go into the cache, you don't need to go into the install folder. You only want to go into the config folder for now. So I am going to go into the environment folder, I'm going to go into the includes folder, and I am going into the paths YAML. I'm going to open that up in my editor. So, okay, cool. Now, it's already got some default paths in here. This is basically listing which application it is and the paths that we want to use when on the various different OSs. So I'm just going to set up Maya for the time being. I am running 2016, so I believe that's probably correct. Let's have a look. There's auto. I did see it briefly there. Where's that gone? Autodesk I'm looking for. There it is. It's got an icon. Okay, cool. So I'm going to run 2016, and yeah, that path should be correct. So if I save that and I go back to Shotgun, it's also worth noting that now we've done this project setup, all users can now log in and they will be able to come into here without having to do the setup project, and they're going to be presented with those apps. Now I have set that path, we should be able to go ahead and just launch Maya, hopefully. Let's see what happens. Yeah, okay, cool. And that will launch Maya, and it will have shotgun integration. So we've now got the very basics of what we need to do. It will probably have gone ahead and created some folders as well. So let's go and have a quick look at what it's done. Yes, it's created our first base folders. So what are the questions? What I'm going to do is I will go into how to customize this config and how we deal with that. But before we go too far with that, we will actually, I've got one of the points here is setting up your application path per project. So that's exactly what we did. You could run, we set the path there for Maya 2016, but I only set it on this project. So if you had a different project, and let's say you were using Maya 2017, you would simply go to the config for your different project. So we were in my TV series, but I might go into my film project. I would go into the config, and I could set the paths for that differently. So I could be using different applications or different versions of applications for different projects. And in fact, coming out next week, hopefully, is our new shotgun integrations update, and that changes things a bit, and it actually allows us to be able to pick multiple application versions. Well, you can do it already in this config, but it makes it even easier for running different versions within the same project as well. Okay, cool. So we've got my launched. I haven't got any assets or shots. I've not created anything. So let's just ignore that for the moment, and let's jump back into Shotgun. So I'm going to go to my project, and we'll create an asset and some tasks. Okay. So I'm going to create an asset called a prop, and I will set the type to prop, and I will just pick a task template to go with. Doesn't really matter too much. Let's have an environment task template. Okay, so I've got my assets. I've got some tasks. I'm just going to assign myself to the modeling task. Now, launching your DCC. So there's two ways you can use Toolkit or interact with Toolkit as an artist. One, the portal into using Toolkit can be through the desktop. So the artist will launch, like we just did, Maya, and that will launch them in what's known as a project context. So when it launches up Maya, it's only aware of which project it's in. It's not aware of which asset or task you're working in. So which is why when we launched it, it presented us with the open file dialog. And that allows the artist to then say, hey, I'm working on this task. Let me create a new file, or let me open this file that was there previously. But when you're launching through Shotgun Desktop, you're always starting off in that project context. Excuse me. It is possible, though, however, to use our Shotgun integrations to launch from the Shotgun web as well. Now, you do need desktop running for these action menus that I'm showing you here to be available. So you need to have this running and logged in as the user in order for these options to be available. But once you've got that logged in, then your Shotgun menus for the projects that have been set up with Toolkit will then start to show you these different applications that you can run with Toolkit. So we have the project actions menu. Running stuff from here is actually very much like running stuff from the Shotgun desktop. It's a project actions menu, so that means everything we're running there is within the context of the project and nothing deeper. So not within an asset, not within a task. We may be on this assets page, but because we're going to the project actions menu, we're only launching stuff within the context of the project here. However, we could go into the task, for example, and just below the project actions, there is task actions. And in fact, this button here is available on any entity type that you have set up with Toolkit. So it's not just tasks, it could be the assets themselves. So actually I can even right click on this asset here and say, okay, I want to create the folders for that asset. or I want to see where that asset lives in the file system, or I want to launch Nuke already in the context of that asset. But I could also come to here and say, I want to start Maya in the context of my task. So let's do that. Why not? Okay, so it's going to ask me to authenticate. Okay, yeah. One thing I've just noticed is the user I'm signed into my Shotgun desktop is different to the user I'm signed into on the website. So I'm just going to sign out, sign back in again. Obviously, that wouldn't normally happen. You would normally be signed in as yourself on both the web UI and in desktop. So let's just jump back to where we were. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that again. Hopefully we shouldn't see that pop up. Okay, so what that's doing is it's basically using the Shotgun desktop. Shotgun desktop launches a WebSocket server, which allows the web interface to communicate with Toolkit. And that's going ahead and launching Maya with Shotgun. Just give it a second to load. What are we doing for time? Cool. So it's not, you'll notice it hasn't actually prompted us with a open file dialog this time, because we've not come into it in the project context. We've come into it straight in the task and the asset. So we're already immediately picked what we're working on. We can open up the file dialog and pick a different one if we want to work on a different task. We haven't got any here, but yeah, I mean, I could jump into the concept art. But we're already actually working in the context of our tasks. So I could do some work. I could go ahead and save it. And I could go ahead and publish it and so on. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. Now at this point, I've not done any customization. Also, it's possibly worth noting is that I've not had to go ahead and manually create any of the folders there. So at no point during this part have I said, can you go and create folders? It's actually gone and done that automatically for you. So we go and have a look at my TV series. We can see we've got an assets folder. We've now got a prop folder, a prop, which is the name of our asset. We have our step folders. So these are the steps of our tasks. And I just did some work on the model task. So we can see the folders in here. We can go to the work folder. We can go to the Maya folder. And there's the scene that I just saved. Typically, people don't navigate through the folder structure like that because you can just say, hey, actually, can you go show this in the files? If you want to go see it, you could say, do that, and it will open up where you need to go near enough. But yeah, just to highlight the point that I've not needed to go and manually create those folders. When you launch the application you need to work on, it will make sure that the folders that are needed for your context are created for you. So that means you don't end up with a whole bunch of empty folders sitting on disk. It only creates them on demand. That's not to say that you can't create them up front. You absolutely can. You could, for example, come into your assets, select a whole bunch of assets and say, hey, create me the folders for this. So let's create a new asset called a character. Character, we'll pick a game character template task. So we could jump in here and we could say, okay, create folders for me. It should run. Excellent. So it's created 66 folders on disk. And we could ask, go show us that in the file system. And there we are. So we can see that we are now in the assets folder in the character. So that's our asset type, our character folder. And here's all of the steps that are available on that asset. So that basically covers creating folders. What I'd like to try and get into now is modifying our folder structure, or at least explaining how to go ahead and modify the folder structure. So let's go back and have a look, a little bit more of a look at the config. So as I explained, everything you're going to want to configure is within this config folder. Let's just take a very quick look at the install folder. This is where all of the apps and the engines and the core API live with your project. So in the App Store, we can see all of the apps that Toolkit has downloaded. It automatically manages these for you, so you don't need to worry about downloading them manually and placing stuff in there manually. You can do all of that through the tank command, and I will come to that as well. In the config, though, let's have a look at trying to change our folder structure that Toolkit has just created for us. So we're going to go into the core folder here. Now, there's two things to the templates and modifying the folder structures. We do have very good documentation on how to go through this in greater detail, but basically there's two things to be concerned with here. If you're going to change the schema, which is basically our template folder structure, then you're going to also need to change the templates as well. Now, I will come back to the templates, but just bear in mind that if you change the schema, you need to change the templates. So let's jump into our schema. Now, the first thing in the root is called the project folder. If you're not doing multiple routes, then you'll just leave that as it is. You won't want to change anything there. You'll always have your project folder. I will come back and cover how we set up multiple routes, but right now we'll just accept that we have a project folder and we'll move forward. So once we've gone into the project folder, we have a bunch of what's called static folders. These are not dynamic. They will always be named these things. So we will always have an assets folder, an editorial reference, and sequences folder. Now, if we jump into the assets folder, we can see we have an asset folder, an asset type folder, but we also have what's called a YAML file, and it is also the same name as the folder. Now, that's very important, because what we're saying here is actually we want to dynamically resolve this folder. So when we create the folders for our assets, we're not going to create a folder called asset type. We actually want to create a folder that is representative of the assets type. So we have a folder in here, but we also have this YAML file, and this is where it's quite important. This is where the magic is happening. Again, we have a very good documentation on all the different types of dynamic folders that you can have. This one is a shotgun list field. It is of type asset. We've got skip unused false and the field name. So what this is saying is that to create this folder, the name that will be given to the folder is the field name. So it's the SG asset type. And that's the field name of the asset. So this folder represents an asset, and it is the name given to this folder is taken from the SG asset type. Just to clarify where that is SG asset type. So we are taking our asset type name from this. Because this is a list type, the dynamic folder type should be shotgun list field. Again, worth reading through the documentation on this specifically. I'm just going to go over it and cover it in basics, so you sort of have an idea of how it's set up. But that will cover more in more detail the rules that you have to follow when setting up this schema. So we go a bit further, and within our asset type, we actually have an asset folder. So again, let's have a look at the asset YAML. We know that this asset YAML corresponds to the asset folder. It's got the same name. And in here, we can see that it's a little bit more complicated. So this one is a shotgun entity type. So this means that this folder here, when it's created for the asset, will be representative of that asset. And that means that that folder can be unique only to that one asset. So you can't have two different assets using this same folder. So if you had two assets named the same thing, you would not be able to create those two folders on disk. It would not be allowed. This folder has to be unique to one particular asset because it is a shotgun entity type. With the name is going to be code, so it's going to take its name from this field. So whatever value is in here will be what's given to the folder structure. There is some name sanitization going on there. So if you had a space in here, it will probably strip the space out and put an underscore in. You can customize that. That's all available in what we call hooks, but just so you're aware. We could do all sorts of things here. We could say, actually, I want the asset ID plus the name. So let's say that I wanted to have 5 assets called the same thing. Now, I've said we can't have that because they would all be sharing the same folder. But one way we could make them unique is to say, well, let's have the ID at the beginning and then have the code. I mean, you probably don't want to do that, but just to show that you can use multiple fields when building this folder name. You could pick any folder, any field on your asset, and use it to help produce or populate that name. So again, entity type, fairly self-explanatory, and the filters are quite important because they say we only want to create this project, this asset in this project, and we only want to create this asset if the parent asset folder, asset type folder is of our same asset type. So if this asset's asset type is, say, prop, and the folder above is prop, then we can go ahead and create this folder. If the folder above is character, then we're not going to want to create the folder if we are a prop asset. So that just makes sure that without that line, what you will end up with is a, let's just jump back. What you will end up with is in the prop folder, you would end up with your character folder, and also in the character folder, you would end up with your character folder. So it's important that you have the filter in there. It makes sure that it's only going to create the chain of folders based on its parents. Okay, so then we have a step folder, and then we have some static folders after that, and then we have some, I'm just going to fly through these a bit, but then we have some 3ds Max, for example. We've got a YAML here that says we're going to create a 3ds Max folder and defer the creation until someone launches 3ds Max. So this folder will only be created if one of your users, for example, is using 3ds Max. If they're not, then that folder will never be created and put into your actual project folder. So let's go ahead and make a change, I think, just to represent that just to show that we can. And what I'm going to do here, and this isn't necessarily what you'd want to do, but I'm going to go and make a change so that we have a task folder instead of a step folder. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this folder and call it task. I'm also going to go back and copy my asset YAML just as a basis here, and I'm going to call this one task. And I'm going to delete my step folders. Great. Okay, so I've got a task folder. Now that still contains the publish, reference, review, work, and all of that stuff. That's fine. But what I want to do is change this so that this will be dynamically created based on the task that I'm launching. So the first thing I need to do is change the entity type from asset to task. I'm actually going to set that back to code. I think that's the correct name. I would go and double check that. In fact, I'm going to just remove that because I don't want the ID code in my asset as well. Okay, but I've got a task folder. It's going to be a shotgun entity type. It's going to be the name is going to be taken from the code field, which I believe to be correct. Let's just check. Oh, it's content. Those ones always trip me up. Okay, so I don't want to use code. I want to use content. So the name for the task will be taken from the content field. And we don't need this, but what we do need to do is we need to say that our asset, that we only want to create this task folder if it is corresponding to the asset folder above. So what we're going to say here is that the task is linked to your asset through a field called link. So we know that this task belongs to the character because of this link field, and the programmatic name of that field is called entity. So I'm going to say that the entity must be the same as the parent asset folder. Otherwise, don't create my folder. So let's go ahead and test this. Now, because I have changed the schema, because I've already created some folders on this project, and I'm now changing the schema, this can result in some issues. So basically, if you're testing your project, this is fine, not a problem. But if you're working on a production project, you don't want to be changing the schema unless it's not going to affect your data. So let's go back and have a look. So it's already gone ahead and created these character and prop folders. Now I've changed the schema, and so this folder structure is now wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that folder. But also, I need to unregister those folders. So when we create folders in Toolkit, we actually create a reference to them in the database so that we can backwards, reverse, understand that folder structure. So we can say, given a certain path, that's the context you're in. So this path represents this task. So we create a registry in the database. So you can't just simply delete the folders. The old folders are still registered to those entities. So I'm going to go ahead and delete, unregister those. So what I need to use is I need to use that that tank command that I showed you earlier, which is this. So I'm just going to navigate to there. I've got a little shortcut alias there. So so just to show you where I am, I'm in my folder here, the one above, and then I'm going to run the tank command from my TV series. So I'm going to do my TV series tank. If I just do that, what it's going to do, it's going to list everything that's available, all the actions that are available for me to run. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. We could launch Maya, we could launch Nuke, we can create folders. There's all sorts of things, but the particular one I'm looking for in this situation is unregistered folders. So I'm going to run this again, but I'm going to pass it the unregistered folders command. And I'm just going to, because I don't care about any of the folders, I'm just going to say unregister them all. So it's going to say, hey, I'm going to unregister all of these folders. Is that okay? Yes, it is. And it will do that, and it's unregistered them. Okay, cool. So we're now good to go ahead and create those folders again. Now, if you're just testing stuff out, you could create a separate asset, create the folders. If the schema doesn't know what you want, you could create a new asset, create the folders. You could keep doing that. If it's a test project, then that's fine, and that's a quicker probably iteration than going through deleting the folders and registering them every time. But be aware that if you try to create the folders again for an asset that's already had its folders created, you will run into issues. So hopefully that's clear. So I've unregistered those folders. Let's go ahead and create the folders for my task here. Oh, okay. So I've not actually got the app installed on my task thing. Now I'm jumping ahead of myself there. I don't want to show you how to do that right this second. And I have a feeling that if I create the folders for my asset, it's not actually going to create my task folders because I need to put a special flag in there. But this is good because this will hopefully show some of the steps we need to go through. So it's created those folders on disk. Let's go have a look at those. So it's created the character folder, it's created the asset folder, but it's not gone in and actually created our task folder. Why is that? The reason for that is if we go back to our schema now, let's go back to where we created that task folder. Let's open up that task YAML. What we need to do is grab the create with parent, I believe is the name. So let's go. What I can't remember is the exact key off by heart. So I'm just going to go look up. Okay, so this is what we need. This is the bit that I'm missing. Create with parent is true. So by default, some folders do and some folders don't. So step folders would by default create with their parent. Task entity folders by default don't. So I'm just going to add that line into there, save that. And now we can run this create folders again, and it should hopefully create our task folders for us. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, cool. So it is gone and done that. It's gone and created our task folders for our character. And there we have successfully made a change to our schema. Not saying that you'd want to create task folders, but just to simply give an example of how you might customize your folder structure. Okay, so we are we are beginning to run out of time. What I did want to cover, there's so many things to cover, but what I did want to cover is, because it was asked, is how do we do a multi-route configuration? So we do have, again, some very good pages on this. What I would say, I will show you I've already got a multi-route project set up here, so I will talk you through how that's being configured. Now, when doing this, when you go through the project setup for the first time, let me just see if I can pick one which hasn't been set up. We'll pick the shotgun default. There is the option to go with a multi-route config to start with, but don't worry if you don't pick that. In fact, I wouldn't necessarily pick that. You can certainly change any project config. So if you start off as a single route config, you could then later change it to a multi-route config anyway. So it doesn't matter which you pick here. You would need to manually change and make tweaks to it probably anyway. So in order for multi-route to work, you would need to go back to your site preferences. You would need to have file management and expand the file management and add in some extra storage location routes. Now, in my example here, I've created one called London and Vancouver, but you might wish, for example, one of the scenarios I've seen is the client has local, their work files stored on their local and their published files stored on the server. So you could, for example, have a storage location called local, and you need one. Currently, you need one called primary. That requirement will hopefully be removed in the future. It's not technically needed, but unfortunately, the program will complain if you don't have one. So for example, your server location could go under the primary location. You could have a secondary local file storage called local, and the path on that would be to the user's local C drive, for example. Now, the way that then gets configured within the project is that you go to we go back to the schema here. So I've jumped into the configuration for my multi-route example here. Now, previously we just had a project folder. In this example, I've got one called primary, I've got one called Vancouver, and I've got one called London. Now, what that means is that each one of these can have a different schema. So for example, let's say Vancouver only has assets, which we only need to put the asset folder schema into here. So that's what we have. We have a Vancouver folder, and the London one contains, let's say, everything else, your sequences and your editorial. So that's what we've got in the London one. Now, my primary actually doesn't contain anything in this situation. It's kind of, as I said, there is a requirement for you to have a primary. It doesn't mean you actually have to put anything in it or even use it. It's just a bit of a silly requirement, which we will be trying to remove. So if you did want to have your two different storage locations named something other than primary, you can do that, and then you just have to have a primary one with nothing in it. Now, the key bit of magic here is in these YAML files again. So let's have a look at the London YAML file. So the type is project, and we're saying that the root name is London. So that corresponds directly to the root file storage location called London here. And my other one will be called Vancouver. So it's really as simple as creating a different project-based folder with a different root at the beginning of your schema for all the different locations you want to be available in your multi-route setup. Now, I know I haven't really jumped into, so that will handle the schema and the creation of the schema in those different locations. What I haven't really covered is the apps themselves. Now, I realize we're coming up for nearly 11:30, and I would like to try and get some questions in. But what I really ought to cover is just a little bit of the templates. So going into the schema, we've just looked at the schema. If you come out of the schema, there is a templates YAML file, and I'm going to go have a look at this. The templates YAML is what Shotgun Toolkit uses to tell the apps where to save their files. So the schema will create folders based on context, and it will register those paths. However, that doesn't tell us where, for example, we need to save our Maya file or our nuke renders or anything like that. So that's where the templates comes in. The templates tells us where to save a specific type of file within our schema. So at the top here, we have some keys. I'm not going to go into this too much, but these are basically represent the dynamic values we can use when building our paths, and we can apply certain filters and different types here. So for example, when we use the name key, the user is only allowed to use alphanumeric. So that actually applies when saving a scene file. The user will only be able to use alphanumeric characters. You could customize that to be regex, so you could allow them to use underscores, for example. But that just sort of gives you an idea of what you can do with the keys. The keys are the sections that the names of the things that we will be using within our path. So for example, we have a key for sequence, we'll have a key for step, for asset type up here, and then we can use those in our path. So the really interesting bit here is the paths. So at the top we have some routes, and this is just really shorthand to save us writing out these paths for every different type of thing that we need to create. So we've just defined some routes that we can use further down. Hopefully it'll just make it make sense as I go down and explain that. But the asset route, basically this is the path that we described in our schema. So we've got the assets folder, we've got the asset type, we've got the asset, and we've got a step. Now I've changed this. I've changed it, so it should no longer be step. It should be task. I also need to just make sure that we have a task folder, a task key. Let's do that. So because I've changed my schema to have a task folder instead of a step folder, I need to now change my path to reflect that change. Now, as I said, we've got lots of different paths in here, and this is how, oh, actually, this is for my MultiRoute, so I probably shouldn't have made that change. But if I was in my, if I was back in the project that we were just setting up, then it should be a task. But basically, yeah, this shows us where things go. So let's have a look. We've got Maya shop work here. So what this says is that when using the Maya shot work template, this is where a Maya file should be saved when working on a shot. So we've got this little bit of syntax at the beginning here that says use the shot route. So again, that's just saving us from typing out that shot route every time. It's not really anything magical. It's going to just insert that shot route path at the beginning of this. And then we're saying that we should go into the work folder, we should go into the Maya folder, and then we should create a Maya scene file with this this template. So it should take the name, should have a dot, and then it should have the version, and then it should have the Maya extension at the end of it. And that's how we know where to save our Maya shop work. The apps then reference these templates. So for example, our save app, and I won't go and show you right now because I am running out of time, but the save app will say, when I'm in this context, which template should I use to save my scene file? Now, we can point at this one. So if we're in the shot context and we're in Maya, then we should use this template for saving our scene file. And that's how we know where we save it. But what's interesting here is that the route name for this is defined as London. So when working on my shots, it will use the London route. Now, if I wanted to create one for Vancouver, that wouldn't actually make sense because I didn't put a shot schema within my Vancouver folder structure. But I did do assets. I did have assets in my Vancouver one. So let's go find an asset one in here. Okay, so here's the section where we're dealing with assets. I haven't edited all of them, but the Photoshop ones here I have edited. So when I'm working on Photoshop on an asset and I'm saving my PSD, then it should go in the asset route, and there's the path, but we're going to use the Vancouver route to save it. So when I'm saving an asset, so if I don't have that Vancouver route available, if I can't access that storage location, then I'm not going to be able to save an asset. It's important to note that these templates, if you're working in that context and the context uses this template, then I need to have access to that route. I expect probably people have questions, further questions on that. Appreciate we haven't necessarily got quite enough time to go through everything. The bond bit that I really wanted to cover. Actually, Mansi, are you there?
Yep, I'm there.
What do you want to, I mean, do you want to go through some questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to go through the environment folder and explain the app, how apps are configured.
So we do have two questions, like maybe
Okay,
I think we
let's
can
cover
just
those.
go through over that. So
Yep.
we have one question, which is like, if we restrict artists from write access to the config directory, how are templates and apps installed on the artist machine?
Okay, good question. So the config is managed by, if the config is stored on the server, then yes, they do need read access, but they don't need write access to the config. The artists themselves don't actually install the apps, so that's up to the person managing the toolkit setup to do so. A brief example of that. So if we just jump back to my my config for my TV series. So let's say the artists have got read access to this, but you've already installed all of the apps, and it's up to you to manage the updates to those. So the artists don't need to be able to install or download anything because you've already installed it to the server location and they can access it. That does change somewhat with zero config, our update coming out. It's important to note that none of what I'm describing now goes away. All of what I'm describing will still be valid after the zero config update, our shotgun integrations update. That merely adds additional functionality. But yes, to answer your question, no, they don't need write access to this because you're going to be the one that's installing and managing the updates to that. So for example, you would use the tank command to run this tank command, and you might say tank updates. Oh, because I'm not in the right project, so let's do my TV series tank updates. And what that's going to do is it's going to look through over all of the engines and the apps and check to see if there's any updates to if we've released any updates to the app. So here we go. There is an update to this TK multi-launch app that I need to install, and I'm just going to say, yeah, go ahead and install them all. So it's going to go through and it's going to update all of my apps. As the person that's managing the pipeline, the TD, they will run that update and they will manage that. So they obviously need write access, but the artists don't. Now, hopefully that answers that question.
So the next question that we have is basically, will the artist have permission to create folders on the machine while working on a task for which the folders have not been previously created? So I understand that, a lot of studios do not give creating folders access to the artist. So maybe that's the reason why we have this question.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, that's possibly a reason where you do want to create folders. You can, so using our hooks. So I haven't really delved into the hooks too much, but the hooks are a way of you being able to customize the behavior of Toolkit and its apps without actually modifying the core code. We do have a hook here for Toolkit core, and I'm not going to go in and explain how to set up hooks right now, but there is a hook here that allows you to configure the permissions of folders so that you could set, I'm not sure which one that is, I think it's process folder configuration, possibly, yeah, this one. So this controls creation of the folders, and you can actually set the permission levels on that. So it might be that you, in order to get around this, let's say that you don't want your artist creating folders to a certain level, you could configure this so that your folders are not writable by artists. So in those situations, yes, you would probably want to create the folders up front. So let's say you've created your assets and your shots in Shotgun. The artist isn't going to be able to create those folders, so you're going to have to be the one that creates those folders up front for them because you've got right permissions to those folders. Once those folders are created, that's fine. But you will obviously need some write access somewhere because otherwise the artists aren't going to be able to save their files. So it's going to be up to you to customize this to say, okay, when I've got, I don't know, a task, when I'm inside a task folder, then they've got write permissions, but anything above that, they haven't got write permissions and they can't modify. So hopefully that should answer that question, but it would require a little bit of customization to get that to work. By doing so, you may run into a few issues, but you'll be able to resolve them. It's just going to be a case of making sure that you've created all of the folders the artist requires for their given context up front. So you could do that in a number of ways. You could just have the producer, whoever's got write permissions, to go into the Shotgun web UI and say, all right, okay, go ahead, create all those folders for those assets. Or you could write an event that maybe went and did it in the background using our event system. There's various ways you could tackle that problem.
Yeah, one of the easiest ways that I do it is by just right-clicking on the folders and creating the default folders that we have. So yeah, I think it's a good way of letting the IT guys, or maybe the main people, the admin people, to take care of the folder structures, and then let the artist do the creative part of it. Okay. So here we have a next question. If we are integrating Shotgun into an existing workflow where there's already a folder where project assets are stored, is it a good idea to or use that existing projects share for Shotgun, or does it need its own project directory?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my feeling would be it'd be better to keep it separate, because Shotgun ultimately manages its own folders. So that way we wouldn't, if you've got manually created folders and you've got automatically created folders, then you run the risk of those folders sometimes clashing. I mean, Toolkit isn't going to delete any folders for you, but it might create folders, want to create folders that you've maybe already created or get in the way. You could put them in the same. I would personally advise keeping those two things separate. So if you've already got project data folder structure, I would probably create a separate root folder for your Shotgun project and gradually transition over to that. But yeah, it could work. It could work, but perhaps not advisable.
Thanks. The other question that we have, will zero config have easier way to define multi-route config paths while setting up the project upfront?
No. So zero config is actually aimed at, well, zero configuration. So it's very much focused around the idea that you don't, in fact, zero config doesn't handle your paths at all. It just really allows you to get access to the apps and do some publishing, but it doesn't have a schema. It doesn't have any templates. It means that it's basically a step so people can get started with Toolkit without having to get bogged down in all of this configuration. Now, obviously, this configuration allows you to do a lot. It's very powerful, but some of the smaller studios maybe that don't have TDs don't have that time and resources to put into doing that. So zero config is aimed at the smaller studio who don't want to get bogged down in that initial configuration, but that want to benefit from some of our integrations. There are some of the other, zero config isn't just purely focused on that. There are some things that are happening that will benefit the more advanced, which I've been talking through today. So everything I've been talking through, as I said, is still valid, because this is what we consider the more advanced Toolkit setup now. But yeah, setting up multi-routes up front, you could, as I said, you could create the project on the default, then configure it. The project wizard certainly doesn't include any way to manage that schema, because obviously it is quite complex creating that schema, and trying to do that within a wizard wouldn't be very easy or usable. So if you want to manage your multi-route config before creating the project, you could in theory download our config and just configure it, and then when you go to the set up the project, you can then instead of going Shotgun default, you could browse to it and pick your multi-route from disk that you've already pre-configured to have all the various different routes. And as I said, if you're going to use the same multi-route configuration for, like, let's say all of your projects, or they're virtually the same, and then you just configure one slightly afterwards. You could always pick a different project to use as your base. So if you've already set up a multi-route project, you could always pick that project as your base for your new project, and that will also have the multi-routes. So actually, if I do that here, and let's say that I pick my multi-route example, and we continue forward, we can actually see that all the paths for London, Vancouver, and Primary are there. So it does understand that, but it just doesn't allow me to configure it within the wizard. So yeah, unfortunately, there's no way of getting around that. You do need to dive into the template to customize the configuration, but you could certainly do that before the wizard, but it would just mean downloading it and pointing at that config during the setup. Yeah, hopefully that answers that one.
So we have a last question. How to create all folders for shots or maybe assets in one go? Is that an easy way that we can create it? I do land up doing it from the assets or the shots landing page by just selecting and right click create folders. But is there any way that we can create the shots and the assets folders in one go?
Not it's possible. It is possible. I've not tried it. You might be able to set that create with parent flag on the asset folders so that everything just gets, even if you create one, it will actually just create everything. It would be a bit weird. I think no, but then it's hopefully not too bad for you to just go to your assets page and then to your shots page and just select everything, create folders, and it will go ahead and do that. It's not a huge amount of work. As I said, if creation of folders is your worry and you need them created up front, I would recommend possibly setting up our shotgun event daemon so that you have an event looking out for creation of assets or shots, and it will go, then use our Toolkit API to go ahead and create those folders for you automatically. So you could have it, so for example, I mean, I suppose there's some risks with that, because if somebody creates an asset with a wrong name, then it would go ahead and create it. So there may be some mechanisms you can put in there, like maybe wait 10 minutes or something before going ahead and creating that folder. But yeah, largely we don't have another way of doing it. It would be to just go ahead and select all your assets and then say create folders. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's the last set of questions that we had. Yep, that's.
I mean, I don't necessarily want to, that's a lot of information and there's still more stuff I can pass on. I mean, I'm happy to go into some of the config stuff. Do we think that's worthwhile spending a quarter of an hour on that?
I think we
or should we leave that?
I think we can do that on the another session. Maybe
Sure.
if we have other set of questions right now around that configuration, then maybe we can cover that up. But yep, I think that's good enough for now.
Okay. Well, I mean, just to say what I was missing out then was there's another section which is those environment files, and they control what apps and various things that you're seeing in the different contexts. So for example, like when I went into that task and there wasn't the create folders option there, that's all configured through those environment files, and I could actually add that create folder action into the task. So that's the bit that I wasn't missing out. It's how does, for example, desktop know what apps to display here? Can I put my own custom tools in there? Yes, you can, and that's done through that configuration section. But yeah, perhaps it's best left to another day.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thank you, people. We're going to wrap this webinar up because we've answered all the questions that we see. Another part of it, we'll come back to you with a third part and we'll cover up the topics. So in case if you have any specific topics that we'd like to cover, then please email to us at mansi.short.sha@autodesk.com. So maybe that's an easier way to pile up the questions or maybe the topics that you'd want us to cover up. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that sounds like a good idea, Mansi. But if you do need an answer, if you're setting it up and you're a bit stuck and you need an answer sooner, then by all means, please put a ticket in and we can try and cover it before and with our street team.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, well, thank you for everybody for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.